The sky over the Middle East is illuminated by the intense kinetic exchanges of Operation Epic Fury. The Strait of Hormuz, the world's most critical energy choke point, is effectively paralyzed. Geopolitical tension is at its absolute peak. According to every traditional economic textbook ever written, this is the exact moment when global wealth should aggressively flee into the ultimate safe haven. Gold should be skyrocketing to unprecedented historical highs, but it is not. Instead, we are witnessing an inexplicable phenomenon. Gold has violently crashed by 18.5%, wiping out billions of dollars in retail investor wealth in a matter of days. Does this make any logical sense to you? If the world is standing on the precipice of a broader conflict, why is the ultimate crisis asset collapsing? Welcome to Prism News, where we look past the mainstream headlines to show you the true mechanics of global power. The financial media will tell you that the gold crash is just a temporary market correction. Do not believe them. The truth is far more sinister. The crash of gold is the early warning siren of a massive, hidden implosion within a $26.1 trillion offshore financial matrix. A matrix that the Federal Reserve does not control, does not fully understand, and cannot easily save. It is called the Eurodollar system, and it is currently freezing to death. To understand why your portfolio, your savings, and your purchasing power are under immediate threat, we have to follow the money far beyond the borders of the United States. And I want to ask you right now, who do you think really controls the value of the dollar in your wallet? Is it the chairman of the Federal Reserve? Or is it a shadow network of foreign banks you have never even heard of? Let us uncover the reality. The greatest illusion sold to the American public is that the Federal Reserve controls the global supply of United States dollars. That is mathematically false. The vast majority of dollars used in global trade, specifically to buy and sell energy, are created outside the United States by foreign commercial banks. These offshore dollars are called Eurodollars, and they exist entirely outside the regulatory jurisdiction of the Federal Reserve. They are the true lifeblood of the global economy. Now, let us connect this to what is happening right now in the Persian Gulf. According to recent marine traffic data from Reuters and Bloomberg, the ongoing conflict has severely restricted the movement of commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. We all know this causes oil prices to surge, fueling domestic inflation at the gas pump. But there is a secondary, much deadlier effect that the mainstream media is completely ignoring. When oil stops flowing, the petrodollar stops flowing. Every single day that a supertanker does not deliver its cargo to Asia or Europe, hundreds of millions of dollars are not exchanged. This creates a massive, sudden drought of dollar liquidity in the offshore banking system. Foreign nations and multinational corporations desperately need these dollars to service their massive dollar-denominated debts. When the oil revenue stops, the global economy suffers a severe heart attack. The system is suffocating, starving for cash. And when the offshore world desperately needs United States dollars to avoid default, a terrifying chain reaction begins. A chain reaction that leads directly to the shadow banking sector. When offshore entities cannot get dollars from selling oil, they have to get them from somewhere else. They turn to the shadow banking system. Shadow banks are non-depository financial institutions. Think massive hedge funds, private equity firms, and unlisted credit funds that operate outside traditional banking regulations. According to reports from the Financial Stability Board, this sector controls tens of trillions of dollars in assets. But right now, these shadow banks are facing a catastrophic liquidity crisis. Because of the war, supply chains are broken, and inflation expectations are soaring. This forces bond yields to spike, which simultaneously crushes the value of the underlying collateral that these shadow banks use to secure their loans. When the value of your collateral drops, the clearinghouses and prime brokers issue what is known as a margin call. They pick up the phone and demand billions of dollars in raw cash, immediately, to cover the perceived risk. The shadow banks are trapped. They cannot sell their complex, illiquid derivatives because nobody wants to buy them in the middle of a geopolitical crisis. They cannot sell their real estate holdings quickly enough. So, what do they sell? They sell the one asset that is highly liquid, universally accepted, and sitting in their vaults with a profit. They sell gold. The 18.5% crash in gold is not because the asset has lost its fundamental value. It is a forced liquidation. It is a desperate fire sale by the global elite who are dumping paper gold contracts to raise the cash they need to survive the margin calls. They are crashing the price of your safe haven just to bail out their own highly leveraged, reckless bets. You might be wondering, why does the Federal Reserve not just step in and print more money to fix this, like they did in 2020? Here is the terrifying truth. Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve are flying blind into a hurricane. Domestic data collection has been severely compromised by recent political gridlocks. And even worse, the Fed cannot print offshore Eurodollars. They can only print domestic bank reserves. If the Fed lowers interest rates right now to provide liquidity, they will detonate an inflation bomb here at home. With oil supplies constrained and the cost of imported goods skyrocketing due to the conflict, cutting rates would send domestic inflation into double digits. But if they keep rates high to fight inflation, they strengthen the dollar even further, which accelerates the collapse of the offshore Eurodollar market and triggers even more margin calls for the shadow banks. The Federal Reserve is trapped in a checkmate scenario designed by global macroeconomic physics. They are attempting to perform open heart surgery with a sledgehammer. And who pays the price for this paralysis? You do. While the central bankers deliberate in Washington, the cost of capital for small businesses is becoming prohibitive, and the purchasing power of your salary is quietly evaporating. Let us pivot to how this offshore financial crisis intersects with the physical war. As the shadow banking system bleeds out, the United States government is simultaneously accelerating its military expenditures. The Pentagon is currently burning through billions of dollars in a matter of weeks. The financial asymmetry is staggering. As we have discussed in our previous analyses here on Prism News, the military is deploying highly sophisticated interceptor missiles, costing millions of dollars each, to neutralize cheap, mass-produced drones that cost a fraction of that amount. How is the government paying for this massive defense expenditure when tax revenues are shrinking due to a slowing domestic economy? They issue more treasury bonds, they borrow more money. But here is the critical problem. Foreign central banks, grappling with their own dollar shortages from the Eurodollar freeze, are not buying United States debt like they used to. In fact, many are quietly stepping away. This means the domestic market, the American taxpayer, and domestic financial institutions must absorb this massive issuance of new debt. This drains even more liquidity out of the domestic economy. The government is literally crowding out private investment. Every dollar that goes toward funding a seemingly endless, asymmetric overseas conflict is a dollar stripped away from domestic infrastructure, small business loans, and your local community. It is a hidden war tax, levied through the destruction of domestic liquidity and the erosion of your purchasing power. I want to ask you, our viewers, do you feel that your financial security should be sacrificed to maintain an offshore banking system and an unwinnable overseas engagement? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because this is the reality we are facing. While Western hedge funds are forced to liquidate their paper gold contracts, driving the price down by 18.5%, a massive, silent wealth transfer is occurring on the other side of the planet. Look at the data from the World Gold Council and recent movements by Eastern central banks. Nations like China, Russia, and their strategic partners are not panicking. They are doing the exact opposite. They are aggressively capitalizing on this manufactured price drop. They are converting their surplus United States dollars, the very dollars they want to eventually move away from, into cheap, physical gold. They are draining the physical vaults in London and New York, while the Western financial media focuses on the crashing price of paper derivatives. This is a classic geopolitical arbitrage. The West is selling real assets to cover toxic financial debts, while the East is using fiat currency to acquire real, tangible wealth at a steep discount. When the margin calls eventually subside and the shadow banking crisis forces the Federal Reserve to eventually pivot, regardless of the inflation consequences, the price of physical gold will violently reprice upward. But by then, the actual physical metal will have already migrated to Eastern vaults. You are witnessing one of the largest strategic transfers of wealth in modern history, hidden behind the smokescreen of a temporary price crash. You might think the technology sector is immune to this geopolitical and financial chaos. After all, major tech companies have been hitting record valuations recently. But look closer. Beneath the surface of these high stock prices is a brutal reality. Why are companies like Meta and Alphabet announcing massive layoffs and restructuring, even when they report billions in revenue? It is not just about the sudden advancement of artificial intelligence. It is about cash flow survival in a shadow banking winter. These technology giants know that the era of 0% interest rates and infinite cheap venture capital is over. The liquidity drought in the Eurodollar market affects corporate borrowing costs globally. To maintain their profit margins and keep Wall Street happy in an environment where capital is suddenly expensive and consumer spending is shrinking due to stagflation, they must ruthlessly slash their biggest expense: human labor. AI is certainly a powerful tool, but right now, it is being utilized as a highly effective excuse for a brutal corporate purge. They are sacrificing the white-collar middle class to protect their balance sheets from the macroeconomic storm brewing in the offshore dollar markets. The so-called tech boom is actually a defensive consolidation. They are building a fortress of automation to weather the incoming financial hurricane, leaving the average worker out in the cold. We have reached the endgame of this specific financial cycle. The events of March 2026 are not isolated incidents. The conflict in the Middle East, the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the severe liquidity drought in the Eurodollar market, and the shocking 18.5% crash in gold are all interconnected symptoms of a global system that is structurally breaking down. The framework established decades ago, reliant on cheap energy and a completely unhindered flow of offshore dollars, is fracturing under the weight of geopolitical realignment and unsustainable debt. So, what is the predictive outlook based on game theory? The shadow banking crisis will eventually force the hands of global central banks. They will have to choose between saving the currency by letting the financial system collapse, or saving the financial system by sacrificing the currency through massive, coordinated money printing. History dictates they will always choose to print. When that happens, the fiat currency in your bank account will be heavily debased. This is not a time for panic. It is a time for calculated, strategic action. At Prism News, our analysis suggests that you must stop viewing wealth through the lens of paper derivatives and manipulated spot prices. The forced liquidation of gold is an opportunity, not a warning to flee. The smart money is using this crisis to acquire scarce, hard assets, whether that is physical precious metals, critical energy infrastructure, or verifiable decentralized assets. You must detach your financial future from a matrix that relies on shadow banking leverage and endless war. The system is resetting. Make sure you are positioned on the right side of the wealth transfer. Thank you for watching Prism News. Stay vigilant, question the narrative, and we will see you in the next report.